I've had this Mini-ITX case laying around my workshop for quite a while, so I decided it was time to put this thing to use. I think this is made by a company called Mini-Box. The model number is M350, and I've seen these on eBay as well as some other places online. And I think it was about $40 or so when I bought it. Kind of a nice little case. It uses a full, what I would call a full height I/O shield, standard Mini-ITX form factor. But these cases are very small because they don't have internal power supplies. You either have to use a motherboard with an onboard DC input or get a Pico PSU and install one of those to run a standard motherboard, and then you'd put the DC input jack in this hole right here. This hole can also be used for a, I believe, a wireless LAN antenna if you're not using it for the DC input. Take another look at this case in just a minute. I've got an Intel 530 series SSD. I'm hoping this one's going to work better than the 330 series that's in my netbook, because that thing was kind of a piece of junk, constantly freezing and stuff. But I got this, actually bought this brand new and was going to put it in the living room home theater PC and never got around to it, so I'm going to use it to test this system out instead. I dug up 4 gigs of Elpida DDR3 1333 that was just laying around in my spare parts box. I think these came out of 2 different laptops that I upgraded, but they appear to be matching chips, so they should run in dual channel. And this thing here is the optional hard drive bracket for the case. And the heart of the project is the ASRock Q1900 DC-ITX. This is actually the second one of these boards I've bought. I recently got another one of these and installed it in my bedroom home theater PC, and it worked well enough that I decided to get a second one. Another one that I was looking at was the Athlon 5350, the AMD AM1 platform, because they had another board that had a DC input, but that board was out of stock, and since I had some RAM laying around for this one, I decided to get a second one of these because it would have cost me an extra $50 to buy RAM to run the AMD board, and I really didn't need the more powerful 3D graphics that the AMD chip has. Here's what the board looks like. They're actually pretty simple because almost all the functionality is integrated right on the CPU package itself. This is called a system-on-chip design, so there's no really big north or south bridge chips like you'd see on a lot of full-size motherboards. There's some, external chips for the I/O functionality, like the SATA 6 gig and the audio and the LAN port and things like that. You've got a pair of SO-DIMM slots. These support 1.35 or 1.5 volt memory. And let me think what else is on here. These 2 ports here are the power ports for the drives. They give you these 2 cables to provide power to the hard drive or optical drive, since there is no standard ATX power connector on these boards. They do have a second variant of this board that does have the regular ATX connectors though. I just bought the DC version because it's what I needed. You got USB 3.0, USB 2.0, and this is your front panel LED and switch connector. Trusted platform header. What is this? I can't tell if that's a serial port or another USB right there. I think it's a COM port actually, and this is the parallel port, another old school bit of I/O. Front panel audio, expansion slot here, and that little anchor there is for the screw that holds the card in place, which they give you. You could put a wireless LAN card or something in there. I'm not sure if that would support an SSD. I don't think it does. Never really looked into that though. On the back panel, it's actually got both PS2 ports, which is getting less and less common for boards that are this modern. Usually they just have one or none at all. The DC input jack, got DVI-D, VGA, HDMI, 2 USB 2.0 ports, 2 USB 3.0, LAN, and audio. It's got pretty much everything on it that you would need for your average computer. The only disadvantage of this is the really weak onboard graphics, but for home theater PC use, these things are great. Here's a look inside the case. It comes standard with one hard drive bracket, which can also be used as a fan bracket for two 50mm fans. I bought the secondary bracket, which was an option. You know, that way if I decide to put in an SSD and a mechanical drive, or a drive and some fans, either combination, you know, whatever you decide to do. Another nice thing about this case is that behind the faceplate there's a hidden USB port in there, like a standard external type USB port where you can plug in a memory stick or a wireless LAN adapter or Bluetooth adapter, anything you want really, and keep it hidden behind the faceplate. There's looks like a spot for another 50mm fan down here. Other than that, I mean, there's just pretty much just the motherboard and drives going here. This would be the easiest build ever. 4 screws, just pop in the I/O shield, hook up the cables, and mount the drive, and pretty much it. No power supply to try to fit in there, and don't really have to worry about cable management because there hardly is any cables. Let's see how everything fits. Well, I've got one bit of a design flaw going on with this case. The way the SATA connectors are with this board, the wires actually come off the bottom. It has to plug on like this, and you can't do that when there's metal right here. So I may have to cut this out and, you know, have that little modification for this plug to fit through, because I don't like to jam it on there, especially on a brand new SSD. I don't want to risk damaging that connector. Instead of cutting that plate, I decided to try mounting some old motherboard standoffs on the bottom of the drive to drop it down from this plate a little bit, because I think even if I was to cut that and make room, the plug might stick up and hit the top cover. So if there's enough clearance, I'll be able to use these standoffs to lower the drive down a little bit farther into the enclosure and make everything fit. So far this is looking much better. I don't have to stress the connector on the back of the SSD or pinch those wires on the metal plate. So now my only concern is, will it clear the CPU heatsink and the other end of the SATA cable without pushing on this connector and damaging it. There's not a lot of space in here to put all this excess wire, but luckily that Intel SSD came with a sort of low profile SATA cable. Even though it was kind of long, it was a little smaller and more flexible than the one that came with the motherboard, so I just folded the wires and zip tied them, and I should be able to fit them underneath that hard drive tray. Well, I made the best of the situation with all the extra wire, and everything fit in there pretty well actually. None of the connectors are being stressed, and there's still plenty of room for airflow. In an ideal situation, I would buy a very short SATA cable that would fit exactly in there, but I have to use what I have on hand at the moment. But I think this thing's ready to be hooked up and tested. Alright, this thing's ready for power up. I'm using a 12-volt adapter. I think it's a 5.8 amp rated supply. Really good quality unit. Alright. We have power. Oh, I forgot I have Windows 7 on this SSD already. I want to go into the BIOS first though. This thing is so quick that it's not hardly giving me a chance to hit the button. Yeah, I'm picking up some interference on my audio here. That's really annoying. I think that's what happens when I have the amp plugged in over here and the computer plugged in over here. I get a weird ground loop deal going on, so I'm just going to turn that off for now. Alright, cool. It is running in dual channel. All the RAM is detected and it's running at the proper speed. That makes me very happy. BIOS version 1.10. I'm going to update that using the built-in instant flash thing. Network configuration, I need to change this to USA because I'm not in Europe. DHCP is correct. Let's go back. Alright. Whoops, I hit the wrong thing. Yeah. Okay. There we go. Current version is version 1.20. Improve Windows 32-bit OS compatibility. And not something I'm really worried about, but I'm going to go ahead and update the BIOS anyway, just to, in case there's any other fixes in there that aren't documented. Pause the camera for a bit here. Alright, BIOS is all updated. So I'll get this thing all restarted and I'll head back into the BIOS and make sure everything's set correctly before I boot the OS. Alright. Version 1.20, so it's all updated. Just out of curiosity, what are we running at for temperature here? CPU is 32 degrees Celsius, motherboard temperature 34. Wow, motherboard temperature is actually reading higher. Not bad so far. See how hot it gets after I run it for a while. And AHCI is already turned on, so that's good. I'm going to turn on the smart capability though, because I like to have that on there. Aggressive link power management, I'm just going to leave that off for now. So, save changes and exit. This version of Windows is just a test install. It has not been updated yet, so it's probably not going to run as good as it normally would. I'm not going to be using Windows 7 on this right now because I don't have another license laying around. Believe it or not, I'm going to try running Windows Vista on this because I do have a couple Vista licenses, but I'd like to run Linux Mint more than anything if I can get it to work on my living room TV, because that TV for some reason does not like to display a picture when I'm using Linux. I'm really not sure why. But we're up and running here. Let's see what are we sitting at here for power usage. 13 watts. Not bad. I think I've got XBM or Kodi Media Center installed on here. Yeah. Let's pull up some HD video. Let's see here. 43.55 gigabytes for that Blu-ray ISO. Playing this directly off my file server. Boy, I cannot believe the interference I'm getting through the audio ports. I'm going to switch to the HDMI audio. Here we go. Here's a 1 gigabyte file that's I think it's encoded at 4K actually. Let's throw this at it.
Legendary fighter pilot Army O'Reilly once said, "Give me a fully loaded Hornet, and I'll shake the gates of heaven." Aerospace's Hornets have faced Vandal, Xi'an, Pirates.
It's playing perfectly smooth. I know this TV is only 720p, but just the decoding is really nice on this. And we are using 19.5 watts under a load here. I don't know what the CPU load is. Go over to the home page here. Not bad for having Windows 7 running in the background doing updates and stuff too. If I was running the Linux Media Center on here, it would be using even less. I'm using Kodi Ubuntu on the one I have that runs my bedroom TV, and that one's got 8 gigs of RAM in it. But yeah, this thing runs like a charm. I'm not really sure why. The first time I put this together, the first system I built, I tried running OpenELEC Linux on here for the Kodi Media Center, and it had a problem where it would freeze after a couple minutes of playing the video. And for some reason, Kodi Ubuntu works perfectly fine, and so does Windows. So I ended up using Kodi Ubuntu on the one upstairs. But I think I like these little cases. So what I'm thinking about doing is moving my other one from the rack mount case into another one of these and putting 2 of these side by side on a shelf in the rack, so that I can have both home theater PCs right next to each other, and if something goes wrong, it's like the simplest thing in the world to just pick it up and take it in the workshop and fix it, you know. And I think it's going to work out great. As far as the optical drive, what my plan is to use an external USB drive and hook that up right up in the living room where the USB port is. So if we do need to play something off a disc, although I mean we hardly ever do, but if the need arises, we could use the external drive to do that, and this computer can still sit downstairs. Not that this would take up a lot of space in the living room, but it's still more clutter and more cables that have to be hooked up that are normally out of the way with having the home theater PC down here in the server rack. Gotta love the old Windows Vista installation. I haven't seen these screens in forever. Really, there hasn't been that many systems I've installed with Vista, because it was kind of a short-lived thing. Hard to believe I had it on my main computer back when it was new. And it seemed fast to me back then. This is the problem I keep running into with Windows Vista when I'm trying to install the network drivers for this board. I'm not really sure why it does that. Now it looks like the video driver won't install either. Oh well, I guess I'll just have to get Windows 7 for this if I want to use it for all my desktop tasks on the in the living room. I'd really like to get Linux working if I can, but worst comes to worst, I'll just sell a couple things and get myself a copy of Windows 7 Pro 64-bit. Well, I ended up putting Windows 7 on here after all. I figured I was going to need it either way, since I have to move away from Windows Vista. It's not compatible with this hardware, and Linux does not agree with my TV in the living room, so until we get a newer TV eventually, I'm just going to stick with Windows 7 on here. But just out of curiosity, here are the Windows benchmark scores. Not that they really mean much, but still cool to see what it scores anyway. This has 8 gigs of RAM in it now. I actually took the 8 gigs out of my other system and moved them over to this one because the other one was just running Linux and 4 gigs was plenty for that, so I swapped out the RAM between these two systems. I've got a lot more things I want to test on this, but for now I'm out of time, so I'm going to take this thing upstairs and see how it performs on the living room TV and run a couple videos on it, And that's going to be that for this video, but I've got another one coming soon because I'm building some more systems like this and also changing out some of my existing server hardware again. So stay tuned for the updates on that. Well, I noticed I'm getting some occasional stuttering, like it's this video is just freezing momentarily once in a while, even though the CPU usage is not really moving. I'm not sure if it's just something to do with Windows or what the deal is. I found out that stuttering issue was occurring on both of these systems, even though the one in the living room was based on Windows and the one here in my bedroom is based on Linux. They were both running Kodi Media Center 14.0, and apparently that's what was causing the problem, because I downgraded both of them to XBMC version 13.2, and now they both play perfectly fine. So I don't need to worry about it being a CPU issue or other hardware problem. It's just a glitch with Kodi Media Center for some reason. Hopefully they'll fix that on their next update and I can go back to the current version. But in the meantime, I don't think I'm losing any functionality by running the older version of the software. Now that the stability issues have all been solved, I mentioned that I was going to do 2 more builds with these mini cases, one for this bedroom home theater PC and one for my LAN server. But rather than do a separate video and repeat most of that information over again with those same cases, I'm going to just take a look at the steps that were a little bit different with these next 2 systems that I install in those cases, and we'll see how it all turns out when it's finished, and then I can move on to the next project. I've got another Mini-Box M350 case to put the hardware for my bedroom home theater PC in, and this is a 2U rack shelf which is going to be used to hold 2 of these, both of the home theater PCs actually. And I've also got a third one of these on the way and a Pico Power PSU to put my LAN server hardware into. Well, don't mind the glare. I've got this big halogen work light out here so I can see anything on the camera because this corner of the basement is so dark. But I've already started taking things out of the rack. This big empty space here is where the old home theater PC for the living room used to be. That has the AMD APU build in it that was from probably 3-4 years ago. Had the Asus board. And this system here is the one from my bedroom that I'm getting ready to transfer the hardware over right now into its new case. This system here, this is my main network server, or you could just call it the router, basically. That's the one that's making all the noise, and once I get my last case in the mail, I'll be transferring the hardware out of this into another one of those small cases. And at that point, the only thing that's going to be rack mount in this whole rack anymore is going to be the LAN switch and this power strip down here. Everything else is sitting on shelves. I guess the real advantage for me is no more big heavy cases, no more expensive mounting rails. You know, if something breaks, it's light enough I can just pick it up with one hand and take it in the workshop. But they're still going to be mounted on metal shelves and secured and hopefully well cooled, even if it's by convection. And having all those power supplies external to the case is going to make it very easy to replace one if any of them ever break down. I won't have to take anything apart. Just go behind the rack and unplug the power supply and swap it. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this all works out. This case looks so empty with that tiny little board in there. Oh, so much wasted space. This system was definitely a tighter fit than the one I built for the living room. The SATA cable, I had to use the SATA 6 gig connector on the motherboard even though the drive is only rated for SATA 3 gig, because if I had it plugged into the 3 gig connector on the board, the 2 ends of the SATA cable were pushing against each other and it was putting a lot of strain on the motherboard connector. So I had to compromise and barely fit everything in there the way that I have it set up now. I wanted to take a quick look behind this faceplate because there was something I forgot to mention in the first build using one of these. I've got the faceplate removed, and you can see the hidden USB ports in here. I thought there was only one port, but I guess there's actually two. A spot for a 40mm fan, which will also accommodate 20mm depth, so you can have a pretty powerful fan in there if you need one. For this system, I won't be using that. The main thing I wanted to mention, though, was these two jumpers here on this little circuit board. This one here disables the power switch if you don't want it to be tampered with or bumped. And this one here is interesting because if you have a motherboard that does not support automatic power on in the BIOS, this little board here has a pulse circuit on it that will pulse the power switch input on the board and turn it on for you as soon as the system receives power. I would imagine it uses the 5 volts from the USB port to supply power for this circuit. But that's really handy because if the, like I said, if the board doesn't support that function, or if you have one of those boards where if the CMOS battery goes dead and it loses the setting for the automatic power on, and you have an embedded application where the system has to turn on its own every time you plug the machine in, this is a way to ensure that will happen. I won't be using that feature with this case, but it's there if it's ever needed. Although I wonder if certain motherboards won't work with that. It depends on whether the 5 volts is always present on the USB as soon as the power is applied to the motherboard or not. I think most boards have the 5 volts always on there through the standby power, but just a thought anyway. Something else I wanted to mention about this faceplate. When I go to build my LAN server into one of these, I'm going to need some additional LEDs, like for the hard drive activity and LAN activity. And I found what I can do is use some of these air vent holes and just stick LEDs in there and glue them in place. I found some kind of odd tapered LEDs in my junk box that fit right in there snug, and the end of the LED is like exactly flush with the surface of the faceplate. Well, I've got to stop for the night because I got to work in the morning, but I've got my bedroom home theater PC all installed in the rack. The shelf is working pretty good so far. I can't go any farther until I get the next case in the mail, though. Then I can get this thing out of here and you know, finish putting everything else together. And the one for the living room, since I've got it connected to the TV with the VGA for the time being, I can't put that one down here in the rack yet. Once I get a newer TV and I can go back to the HDMI, I'll be able to put it back down here. But in the meantime, it's still progress. Well, it seems like just yesterday I built this system with this case, but I'm already tired of the fan noise and the bulkiness of it just for performing router functions. It's a lot of unneeded space with the full-size power supply and expansion slots and everything. It's already using a 2.5-inch hard drive, so that'll be a direct swap over to the new case. And as long as the cooling is sufficient, I won't need to add any fans, but I'll monitor the temperature, and if I need to add this fan in the front here, then I'll do that, because this board runs a little bit hotter than those J1900s, I think. But anyway, I better get to work. I need to get my internet back up and running. I've got the additional LEDs installed in the faceplate for the new server case. I used some LEDs that I had salvaged from an old stereo system back in the late 80s or early 90s, and they fit right in there. And I salvaged the hookup wires from some old computer cases I stripped a long time ago. In fact, you can tell how old that is because it says turbo LED. I can't remember the last time I had a case with one of those in it. I really wanted to have the colors be opposite, where the hard drive indicator would have been red and the LAN would have been green, but I only had 2 red LEDs, so I didn't have enough to put red hard drive indicators in all of these cases, but I had plenty of green, so I just ended up doing it the other way around. So the server's going to have these 2 additional LEDs, but the other 2 systems are just going to have an additional green one for the hard drive activity. One fun fact about this server, the hard drive is actually out of an Xbox 360. It's only 20 gigabytes. It works perfect for running ClearOS. Well, I'm finally ready to put the cover back on this thing. it got a bit crowded in the case with all these additional cables, but still fit in there nonetheless. And I started up Linux Mint off of a USB stick and verified that all the LEDs are working, so hopefully I'm good to go. So far everything's working pretty well. I can definitely feel some heat coming out of the top of the router, and hopefully it's not anything that's too warm. I'm going to have to just monitor that, and like I said, if I got to add a fan to it, then I'll do that. I've got these ventilated shelves, so the air can come up through the shelves and go through the cases and passively cool, but you know, it only does so much. And as for this big open spot in the rack, I'm probably going to put the 4U case back in there, if even just to store it for future use. I'll just leave one of them out of the rack. And there's always some more stuff that's got to be done to this. So lots of cable management to do, and probably going to add a second shelf right here, just like this one. But that's going to have to come a bit later. I really got to get on with the next few projects, so time will tell how reliable the new setup is, I guess.